"Farmer, don't you recognize me? I'm your childhood love, the Apache Princess." Broken Heart Sparkles. The day was long, the kind of day that leaves a man's bones heavy and his spirit quieter than the wind. The farmer had been working since sunrise, his hands blistered from gripping the plow, his clothes soaked with the dust of his land. Evening was settling in, the horizon painted in fading gold, and all he wanted was to return home, sit by the fire, and rest his weary body. The ranch stretched wide, silent except for the lowing of cattle in the distance and the soft crunch of his boots on the dirt path. He lived alone here. The land was generous but lonely, and though it gave him crops and cattle, it gave him no companionship. He often thought about how empty silence could feel, how it pressed against a man's heart when there was no one to share it with. As he reached the gate, something unusual caught his eye. A figure stood near the fence line, half-shadowed by the dimming light. At first, he thought it must be a drifter, or perhaps a neighbor coming with news. But as he drew closer, his steps slowed. It was a woman. She stood tall, her posture steady, but her eyes carried a softness that struck him like a memory he couldn't place. Her long dark hair shimmered faintly under the last rays of the sun, braided with beads that whispered of a distant culture. Her clothes were worn from travel, yet there was dignity in the way she held herself, as if she carried an entire world within her. The farmer frowned, puzzled. He was not a man accustomed to visitors, especially not strangers appearing at dusk. He cleared his throat. "Can I help you, miss?" His voice was rough, cautious. The woman tilted her head, studying him. For a long moment, she didn't answer, and the silence stretched thin between them. Then, with a voice that was calm but carried an undercurrent of longing, she spoke. "Farmer, don't you recognize me?" The words froze him in place. Something stirred in his chest, confusion, disbelief, and something else he couldn't name. He stared harder, searching her face. There was something in her eyes, deep brown with flecks of gold, that tugged at a distant memory, like a song he once knew but had forgotten the words to. He shook his head slowly. "I'm afraid. I don't." Her lips curved into a sad smile, though her gaze never wavered. She stepped closer, and the beads in her hair chimed softly with the movement. Then she whispered, "I'm your childhood love, the Apache Princess." The farmer's heart stumbled in his chest. Childhood love? Apache Princess? The words echoed like thunder through the quiet evening. He searched her face again, desperate now, pulling at the edges of memories long buried under years of toil and silence. And then, just for a moment, he thought he saw it. A flash of the past, a girl's laughter by the river, dark hair whipping in the wind, a pair of bright eyes that promised friendship forever. But as quickly as the memory came, it was gone again, leaving him adrift. He stumbled back a step, gripping the fence as if it could steady him. That can't be. But the woman only stood taller, her eyes glistening with a mixture of hope and sorrow. The wind picked up then, carrying with it the scent of sagebrush and the sound of the cattle shifting in the distance. The farmer's land, once so familiar, suddenly felt like the stage for something larger, something he could not yet understand. The sun sank lower, casting both of them in shadow. And as the darkness wrapped around the ranch, the farmer realized that his life was about to change in ways he could never have imagined. The farmer doesn't yet believe, but something in his heart is stirring. The farmer lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling beams of his quiet ranch house. Sleep refused to come. Her words repeated in his mind again and again. "Don't you recognize me? I'm your childhood love, the Apache Princess." Childhood love. At first, it seemed impossible. His memories of boyhood were like faded ink on a torn page, blurred, incomplete. But as the night stretched long and the silence deepened, images began to surface from the fog of his past. He was 10, maybe 11, the son of a struggling settler family. Back then, the land was wild, untamed, filled with both danger and wonder. His father often warned him never to wander too far from the homestead. But boys are curious, and one summer afternoon, his curiosity carried him down to the river that cut through the valley. The water shimmered under the hot sun, cool and inviting. He skipped stones across the surface, counting how many times they bounced before sinking. And that was when he heard it, soft laughter carried by the breeze. Startled, he looked across the riverbank. There she was. A girl about his age, her dark hair braided neatly, her feet bare in the sand. Her eyes were sharp yet playful, and she held herself with a confidence unlike anyone he knew. She was Apache. He froze, unsure whether to run or speak. Their families lived in separate worlds, settlers and natives rarely mingled, and when they did, it was often with suspicion. But the girl only smiled, tilting her head as though amused by his hesitation. "You throw stones like a rabbit," she teased. He flushed with embarrassment. "Do not." She picked up a flat pebble, flicked her wrist, and sent it dancing across the river, 5, 6 skips before it vanished. His jaw dropped. She laughed again, the sound bright and unafraid. Over the weeks that followed, he returned to the river. Each time, she was there, as though the river itself had promised to bring them together. They spoke little at first, broken words between two languages. He knew only fragments of her tongue, and she knew only scraps of his. But children have a way of understanding without words. He showed her how to whittle a stick into a toy horse. She showed him how to weave grass into small braids. One day, he brought her a trinket, a small carved wooden feather. Clumsy work for a boy, but made with care. "For you," he said, holding it out nervously. She took it, her eyes softening. From her hair, she plucked a tiny bead, blue as the summer sky, and pressed it into his palm. "Now we remember," she whispered. Two children, from different worlds, sealed a promise with gifts so small, yet so meaningful. One evening, they lay on their backs in the grass, staring at the wide night sky. The stars stretched endlessly, brighter than lanterns, scattered across the heavens. She pointed to a cluster of stars. "That one means return." He squinted, unsure if he could see what she saw. "Return?" "Yes. If you are lost, follow it. It brings you home." He turned to her, serious for once. "You'll always come back here? To the river?" She nodded, her braid falling against her shoulder. "Always. You are my friend. Maybe more." His cheeks burned, but he didn't look away. "Then I'll always come back too." And in that moment, two children bound themselves with a promise as eternal as the stars, but promises are fragile things. The boy's father grew stricter. Rumors spread in town about rising tensions with the Apache. One day, the boy returned to the river, and she wasn't there. Not the next day, nor the day after. Finally, he asked his father about the tribe. His father's face hardened. "They've moved on. Best you forget them. That world isn't yours." But forgetting was impossible. For weeks, he returned to the river, waiting, hoping she would appear. She never did. The carved feather he had given her was gone, and so was the blue bead she had pressed into his palm. All that remained was a hollow ache, a memory he carried silently into adulthood. Underscore 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 underscore. The farmer blinked, jolting back to the present. He sat up in bed, the old wood creaking beneath him. His hand went to the drawer of his bedside table. Inside, tucked away like a secret, was the bead. Blue as the summer sky. His fingers trembled as he held it up, the moonlight catching its tiny surface. He had kept it all these years, never truly understanding why. Now, as her words echoed in his mind again, "Don't you recognize me? I'm your childhood love," the bead in his palm felt heavier than ever. Could it be? Could the stranger at his fence truly be her? The girl from the river, the one he had promised to always return to? His heart whispered yes. His mind screamed no. And as dawn approached, the farmer knew one thing for certain: his past was no longer buried. It had come back, walking on 2 feet, wearing braids, and calling itself the Apache princess. Underscore 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 underscore. The farmer finally remembers the bead and their promise, but doubt and disbelief still hold him back. Underscore 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 underscore. The morning sun rose slow and steady over the plains, casting long streaks of gold across the farmer's land. He stepped out of his cabin, his hat pulled low against the light, and took a deep breath of the crisp air. Another day of work waited, another day just like the one before. The cattle needed tending, the fences needed mending, the soil needed turning. Life here was measured in sweat, dust, and repetition. For most men, the routine would be unbearable, but the farmer had grown used to it. It was his way of keeping busy, of keeping his mind from wandering too far back into the shadows of memory. He worked in silence, the steady rhythm of labor his only companion. Sometimes, the creak of the windmill or the distant call of a hawk reminded him that he wasn't completely alone in the world, though it often felt that way. He had neighbors, yes, but none close. They respected him, nodded at him when paths crossed in town, but there were no warm dinners shared, no children's laughter in his home, no wife waiting for him at the end of the day. Once, long ago, there had been a chance for such a life. A woman he'd almost married, but she had fallen ill and passed before their vows could be spoken. That loss carved out a hollow in him that he never quite filled. Since then, his heart had stayed quiet, locked away, guarded by fences stronger than the ones around his cattle. And yet, despite all his efforts to bury the past, small things always found a way to pierce through. A child's laughter echoing in town could stir memories of a riverbank. A necklace in a shop window might remind him of a carved wooden feather. Even the sky at night, thick with stars, whispered of promises once made under their glow. He told himself those were just dreams of youth, silly and best forgotten. But now a woman had appeared at his gate, claiming to be the very girl from those dreams. A woman who looked at him with eyes that pulled at his chest like an old wound reopening. As he fed the cattle, he found himself distracted, his mind replaying every word she had spoken. "Don't you recognize me? I'm your childhood love, the Apache princess." He wanted to dismiss it, to convince himself she was mistaken, or perhaps even playing some cruel trick. But when he remembered the bead he still kept, hidden away like a relic of something sacred, the doubt in him grew weaker. He wondered if she would return today. Part of him hoped she wouldn't. Part of him prayed she would. By afternoon, the sun burned hot overhead, and sweat rolled down his brow as he stacked bales of hay in the barn. His body moved with practiced strength, but his mind was elsewhere. He kept seeing her standing there by the fence, hair braided, eyes shining with recognition, as if the years had never passed. Loneliness had been his closest companion for so long that he almost feared what it would mean to let it go. To open the door to the past, to the possibility of love, was to invite both joy and pain. He wasn't sure if he had the strength for either. As evening drew near, the ranch grew quiet again. He leaned on the wooden fence, staring out across the land that stretched into endless horizon. The wind carried the smell of sage and earth, the same scent he remembered from his boyhood. And just when he thought the day would end like all others, he saw movement at the edge of his land. A shadow against the fading light. A figure walking toward him. His chest tightened. She had returned. And with her return, the farmer knew his days of solitude were numbered. Something was coming, something bigger than the fences, the farm, and even the quiet life he had built around himself. Whether it was a blessing or a storm, he did not yet know. But for the first time in years, he felt his heart beat faster, alive with something more than just the burden of survival. Underscore 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 underscore. The woman stood at the edge of his land, the sky behind her burning red with the last light of day. She didn't move quickly, nor did she call out. Instead, she walked slowly, as if every step carried the weight of years gone by. The farmer's hands tightened around the fence rail. His throat felt dry, his chest heavy, but he didn't look away. When she reached him, she stopped just a few feet away, her eyes searching his face with quiet intensity. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The air between them felt charged, like the sky just before a summer storm. Finally, she reached into the folds of her clothing and pulled something small from a pouch tied at her side. It glimmered faintly in the fading light. A carved wooden feather. His breath caught. His knees weakened as if the ground beneath him had shifted. He knew that feather. He had carved it as a boy, fumbling with his father's knife, his small hands clumsy but determined. He had given it away to her, pressed it into her palm by the river all those years ago. "You kept it," she whispered, her voice trembling but proud. "After all this time, I still carry the promise you made me." The farmer's heart pounded hard against his ribs. He took a step forward, then another, his eyes fixed on the small token in her hand. He reached out slowly, almost afraid to touch it, afraid that if he did the memory would vanish and she would disappear with it. But it was real. The feather was worn smooth with age, the edges chipped, but it was his. "How?" he finally managed to ask, his voice rough with disbelief. She smiled faintly, though sadness lingered in her eyes. "Because it was the only piece of you I had when the world tore us apart. I told myself one day I would find you again. And when I did, this would be the proof that we once belonged to each other." The farmer closed his eyes, and for the first time in years, the memories didn't feel so distant. He saw himself as a boy again, saw her laughing by the river, saw the night sky as they lay in the grass, promising to return to one another. The weight of those forgotten days came rushing back, and it nearly broke him. When he opened his eyes, she was still there, waiting. Her braids swayed in the breeze, her face illuminated by the soft glow of twilight. "I remember," he whispered. The word surprised even him. They came from deep inside, from a place he had kept locked away for so long. Her smile widened, though tears glistened at the corners of her eyes. She stepped closer now, close enough that he could see the faint scar near her jaw, a mark of the hardships she had endured. She was no longer the carefree girl of his childhood, she was a woman forged by pain and survival, but still, at her core, she was the same soul he had once known. "You doubted me," she said softly, not accusing, only speaking truth. He nodded. I had to. Too many years have passed. My mind tried to bury you. "And your heart?" she asked gently. The question pierced him deeper than any blade. His heart had never buried her. It had only hidden, waiting for a day like this. He looked at her, truly looked at her, and for the first time, the wall of doubt inside him began to crumble. "You are her," he said, his voice steady now. "The girl by the river. The one I thought I lost forever." Her hand trembled as she reached for his, pressing the feather into his palm. The wood felt warm against his skin, as though it carried the heat of both their memories. "Then you know," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I never stopped waiting for you." The farmer's grip tightened around the feather. He wanted to say 100 things, apologies for forgetting, gratitude for her return, fear of what this meant, but all he managed was a single word. "Why?" Her eyes darkened with sorrow, but her voice held a steady truth. "Because even when the world tried to erase you from me, love remembers." The silence after her words was deep, broken only by the sound of the wind stirring the grass around them. The farmer swallowed hard, his throat tight. For the first time in decades, he felt something stir inside him stronger than loneliness, heavier than grief. He didn't know what the future held, but as she stood before him, living proof of promises once thought broken, he understood that the past was not gone. It was alive, breathing again, standing just a few feet away, waiting for him to accept it. And in that moment, he did. Underscore 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 underscore. The night air was cool, the sky above them jeweled with stars. They sat by the fire outside his cabin, the flames flickering between them, throwing shadows across their faces. The farmer stared into the blaze, silent, as though waiting for her to speak. She held the wooden feather in her lap, her fingers tracing its edges again and again. At last, she lifted her gaze to his, and her voice carried a heaviness that made the fire crackle seem louder. "You want to know what became of me after we parted," she said softly. "You deserve to know." He nodded, though part of him feared the answer. "When my people left the valley, it was not by choice. Settlers and soldiers pressed closer every year. The river we played by, it was no longer safe. My father wanted peace, but not all tribes were willing to bow to that. There were raids, fights, losses on both sides. Families split, camps scattered. We walked for days to find new ground, but the world was not kind to us." Her voice faltered, but she steadied herself. "There was hunger. There was fear. Some of us were taken away, some never returned. My father fell in battle, my mother soon after from grief. I was left with little more than the memory of our valley, and the promise of a boy who swore he'd always come back." The farmer's chest ached as he listened. He had lived a life of toil, yes, but not one of constant fear, not one where each dawn threatened to take someone he loved. He clenched his fists against his knees, anger and guilt swirling together. "I thought I'd never see you again," she continued, her voice steadier now, her eyes shimmering in the firelight. "But I held on to the feather. Every time I wanted to give up, I remembered the river, the stars, the laughter we shared. It was the only thing that reminded me there was once a world where I was more than just another face in the dust of survival. That I mattered to someone." The farmer's eyes dropped to the ground. "I should have looked for you. I should have fought to know what became of you." She shook her head gently. "You were just a boy. What could you have done against the tides of men and war? I don't blame you. I never did." Her forgiveness struck him harder than her sorrow. He felt the sting of tears press against his eyes, but he refused to let them fall. A farmer's pride ran deep, but pride felt hollow against the truth of her suffering. "There were years," she went on, "when I wandered between villages, between families, never fully belonging anywhere. The world changed around me. I learned to live without asking too much from it. But deep inside, I kept a piece of the girl you once knew. And when I finally found my way back to these lands, I prayed I might find the boy who had once promised me the stars." The fire popped, sending a small ember drifting upward. The farmer followed it with his eyes until it vanished into the darkness. He wanted to speak, to tell her he remembered now, that her words had unlocked the ache he had long buried. But all he managed was a hoarse whisper. And you found me, just a broken man with too much land and too little left to give. She leaned forward then, her gaze fierce and unwavering. No. I found you alive. That is enough. We are not the children we once were, but the promise still lives. And I believe in promises, even when the world tries to crush them. Her words struck something deep in him, something that had been silent for too long. The loneliness he had carried like a second skin began to feel less like a curse and more like a wound that could, perhaps, still heal. For the first time, he looked at her not with disbelief or guilt, but with something close to awe. She was not just a memory returned to him, she was proof that love, though battered and delayed, could endure the fiercest trials. He reached across the fire then, his hand hovering for a moment before brushing against hers. Her fingers, calloused from years of hardship, closed around his without hesitation. The silence that followed was not empty this time. It was full, heavy with all the words they hadn't spoken, with the understanding that their lives had been torn apart, yet somehow, impossibly, they were here again, together. And for the first time in many years, the farmer felt that the night sky above them, endless and vast, was not so lonely after all. Underscore 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 underscore. Word traveled faster than the wind. By the time the farmer went into town for supplies a few days later, the whispers had already begun. He felt the eyes on him before he even reached the general store. Men leaned against the posts outside, lowering their voices when he passed. Women peered from behind curtains, their conversations cut short, replaced with tight-lipped silence. He kept his head down, tipping his hat as he always did, but the air felt heavier than usual. The clerk at the store, a man he'd known for years, offered only a stiff nod instead of the usual friendly greeting. The farmer loaded flour, salt, and kerosene into his wagon, all the while aware of the murmurs that followed him. By the time he drove back to his ranch, the words had reached him in pieces. The farmer has an Apache woman on his land. He's letting her stay. He's gone soft. He's lost his mind. When he reached the gate, she was there, waiting as though she had felt the storm long before he did. She didn't ask what had happened, she didn't need to. She had lived her whole life with the sting of suspicion. They know, he said, his voice flat, his eyes on the horizon. They always know, she answered softly. That night, the silence in the cabin was different. It wasn't the emptiness he had grown used to. It was the silence of two people bracing for something they couldn't yet name. The next morning, one of his neighbors rode up. Tom Jenkins, a wiry man with a sharp tongue. He didn't bother dismounting his horse, just leaned forward in the saddle with a hard stare. Word is you're harboring an Apache, he said. You know how folks around here see that. Bad for business. Bad for your name. The farmer's jaw tightened. She's no stranger. She's someone I once knew. Someone I made a promise to. Tom spat into the dirt. Promises don't keep a man's land safe. You do well to remember which side you stand on. With that, he turned his horse and rode away, leaving only dust in his wake. The farmer stood there long after he was gone, the weight of the words pressing on his shoulders. The truth was clear, this was only the beginning. Back in the cabin, she looked at him with calm eyes. If I stay, they'll come. Maybe not tomorrow, maybe not next week, but they will. Are you ready for that? He wanted to answer quickly, to reassure her, but the words stuck in his throat. Was he ready to risk his land, his reputation, maybe even his life? For so many years, his existence had been built on safety, routine, and solitude. Now, for the first time, he had something worth losing. That night, as the wind howled across the open plains, the farmer sat awake in his chair, staring into the darkness. Outside, the world was turning against them. Inside, she slept quietly, her presence filling the cabin with a warmth he hadn't felt in decades. The choice was coming. He could already hear it in the whispers, in the warning from Tom, in the way the townsfolk's eyes cut at him like blades. Soon, he would have to decide, protect the life he had always known, or protect the woman who had come back to him after so many lost years. For now, he said nothing. But deep inside, he knew the decision was already made. Underscore 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 underscore. The days that followed were quieter, though the tension in the air never left. He could feel the world outside his fences watching, waiting for him to falter. Yet inside those fences, life began to take on a different rhythm, one he hadn't known in years. She moved through his cabin as though she had always belonged there. In the mornings, he would find her by the hearth, tending to the fire, or out by the well, carrying water with steady hands. When he worked in the fields, she walked alongside him, her presence turning the silence of labor into something almost peaceful. They spoke more now. At first it was small things, memories of the valley, of the river where they once met. She would laugh softly when he struggled to recall the Apache words she had once taught him as a boy. Sometimes she corrected him, her eyes shining with gentle amusement. Other times, she let his mistakes linger, as if cherishing the effort more than the accuracy. One evening, as the sun sank low and painted the land in shades of orange and violet, they sat together on the porch. She braided strands of grass absent-mindedly while he sharpened his tools. The air between them was comfortable, the kind of quiet that spoke of understanding rather than distance. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked suddenly. She looked up. "Regret what?" "Coming back. Finding me." Her fingers stilled on the braid. "If I had not come, I would have lived with the ache of wondering. Now, no matter what happens, I know I was not forgotten." His chest tightened at her words. Forgotten, that was what he had feared she might believe. He set aside the tool, his hands rough and trembling. "I tried to forget," he admitted. "I buried it so deep I thought it was gone. But when I saw you again, it all came back, and I realized I'd been carrying you here all along." He touched his chest, just above his heart. She smiled faintly, her eyes glistening in the fading light. "Love has a way of surviving, even when we try to kill it." The night grew cooler, and she shivered slightly. Without a word, he stood, fetched a blanket, and draped it over her shoulders. She looked up at him, and in that moment, something passed between them, an unspoken acknowledgement that the bond they once shared had not only survived but had grown stronger with the years apart. As days turned into nights and nights back into days, their closeness deepened. They cooked together, their laughter filling the cabin. She teased him about his clumsy bread, and he marveled at the way she could turn simple ingredients into something warm and comforting. When the chores were done, they walked the land together, pointing out stars as they had when they were children. One night, standing beneath the endless sky, she lifted her hand and traced a constellation with her finger. "That one," she said softly, "means home." He followed her gaze, his heart heavy and full all at once. "And do you feel at home here?" he asked. Her answer was simple. "With you, yes." He swallowed hard, his eyes fixed on the stars. The weight of the town's judgment still pressed on him, but in her presence, it felt lighter. For the first time in years, his land no longer felt like just soil and fences. It felt alive, as though love itself had returned to breathe new life into it. Yet beneath their quiet happiness, he knew danger was drawing closer. The whispers had not stopped, if anything, they had grown sharper. He could sense it building, like thunder gathering far on the horizon. But for now, he allowed himself to forget the storm. For now, he let himself feel the warmth of her hand in his, the steady beat of her heart when they stood close. For now, he let love, fragile yet unyielding, take root once more. Underscore 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 underscore. The storm arrived on a night when the air was too still, too heavy, as though the land itself was holding its breath. The farmer had been uneasy all day, the kind of unease that settled in a man's gut and refused to leave. By sundown, he could see dust rising in the distance, a line of riders approaching his ranch. She was already outside when he stepped onto the porch, her figure steady in the fading light. Her eyes flicked toward the horizon, calm but unyielding. She had seen this before, many times in her life, men coming with anger in their hearts. "They're here," he said quietly. She gave a single nod. "I told you they would come." The farmer's hands clenched around the wooden post of the porch. He had known this moment was coming, but knowing and facing it were two different things. His land, his peace, his life, everything he had built was about to be tested. By the time the riders reached the gate, the sky had darkened. Lanterns swung from their saddles, casting long, sharp shadows. There were 6 of them, armed with rifles and hard stares. At their head was Tom Jenkins, the same neighbor who had warned him before. Tom pulled his horse forward and shouted across the fence. "Evening, farmer. We're not here to play games. Word is true, you're keeping her under your roof." He spat into the dirt. "It ends tonight." The farmer's chest tightened, but he forced his voice steady. "She's no stranger to me. She's part of my life, part of my past. I won't hand her over." The men muttered, shifting uneasily in their saddles. Tom scowled. You're making a fool's choice. You're risking everything you've got, for her. Do you even know what she is? The farmer's voice rang out stronger now. I know exactly who she is. She's the girl I once swore I'd never forget. She's the woman who survived when the world tried to erase her. And she's the one I love. Silence followed, heavy and thick. The fire from the lanterns flickered in the dark, painting the men's faces with sharp lines. They hadn't expected him to speak with such certainty. Tom sneered. Love won't save your land. Love won't stop a bullet. Before the farmer could answer, she stepped forward, out of the shadows of the porch, her braid swinging against her back. She stood tall, her eyes fixed on the men with the same fierceness she had carried through every hardship of her life. You think you can scare me, she said, her voice calm but sharp as steel. I've seen more death and fire than any of you. I've buried family, I've walked through hunger and blood, and yet I stand here still. If you want me gone, you'll have to take me by force. But know this, if you do, you'll never erase the truth of who I am. The men shifted again, some looking away, others tightening their grips on the reins. There was something in her voice that cut deeper than anger could, something that spoke of survival and dignity they couldn't touch. The farmer stepped down from the porch then, standing beside her, his shoulders squared, his voice steady. If you come for her, you come through me. The standoff stretched long, the night pressing down on them. The cattle in the distance grew restless, their low calls echoing through the dark. The men exchanged glances, their bravado beginning to fray. Tom cursed under his breath, glaring at the farmer. You'll regret this. One day, this choice will ruin you. He tugged the reins sharply, turning his horse. The others hesitated before following, their lanterns bobbing away into the night until only darkness remained. The farmer stood there, his chest heaving, the adrenaline still burning in his veins. Beside him, she stood unshaken, her eyes fixed on the horizon where the riders had vanished. You could have let them take me, she said quietly. He turned to her, his face lit faintly by the glow of the cabin behind them. And lose you again? Never. For the first time in many years, the farmer felt something stronger than fear, resolve. He had chosen his side, and he would not turn back. The night was not silent anymore. It pulsed with the echo of his decision, with the weight of what was still to come. But as she slipped her hand into his, steady and warm, he knew that whatever storm followed, they would face it together. Underscore 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 underscore. The days that followed the standoff were uneasy. Though the riders had left without bloodshed, the threat lingered like smoke after a fire. The farmer could feel it in the way the town quieted when he entered, in the glares cast his way, in the hushed voices that fell silent when he passed. The peace of his land no longer felt safe, it felt watched. One evening, as the sun sank and shadows stretched long across the fields, the sound of hooves thundered once more. This time there were more of them. Lanterns bobbed in the dark like floating eyes, and the glow of rifles caught in the firelight. He and she stood side by side at the porch, watching them draw closer. Her face was calm, though he could see the tension in her shoulders. He laid a hand on the old rifle by the door, though deep down he knew steel alone could not win this fight. The riders stopped at the gate, nearly a dozen now, their voices hard with drink and anger. Tom Jenkins pushed forward again, his eyes glinting under the lantern's glow. "This is your last chance," Tom shouted. "Hand her over and we'll leave you in peace. Keep her, and we'll burn your ranch to the ground." The farmer's voice cut through the night, strong and unyielding. "You talk about peace, but you bring nothing but fire. This land is mine, and she is under my roof. If you mean to harm either, you'll answer to me." Tom sneered, signaling to the men. "So be it." The farmer braced himself, but before he could lift the rifle, she stepped forward, her presence commanding more than any weapon could. Her voice rang out across the field, clear and sharp. "You think you're strong because you have numbers. But strength is not in numbers, it's in truth. You fear me because I remind you of what you've tried to erase. You fear me because I am still here, unbroken." The men shifted uncomfortably. Some muttered, some looked away. Her words struck something they couldn't answer with bullets or fire. Then, as if the land itself had decided to speak, a sudden clap of thunder split the sky. A storm rolled in from the horizon, fast and furious, the wind whipping dust into the air. Lightning streaked across the dark, illuminating their faces in harsh flashes. The horses reared, uneasy under the sudden fury of the heavens. Rain poured down, heavy and relentless. The lanterns sputtered, shadows scattering in confusion. The mob faltered, their threats drowned by the roar of wind and rain. The farmer raised his voice over the storm. Go home before this land swallows you whole. And one by one, they did. Some cursed, some spat, but none stayed. The storm scattered them like chaff in the wind, until only silence and rain remained. Soaked to the bone, the farmer and she stood together on the porch, breathless. He looked at her, the water dripping from her hair, her eyes burning even in the storm. You faced them without fear, he said, awe in his voice. She shook her head gently. I had fear. But I also had you. And that gave me courage. He reached for her hand then, his fingers curling around hers, warm despite the cold rain. They'll come again. Maybe not tomorrow, maybe not next week. But they will. Her eyes softened. Then let them. We have already survived worse. In that moment, as the storm raged around them, they held on to each other. The trial had come, and though it had not ended in blood, it had tested them both. And together, they had stood unbroken. For the first time in years, the farmer felt the weight of solitude lift. The storm had not only driven away his enemies, it had washed away the fear that chained his heart. What remained was love, fierce and unyielding, rooted deeper than the land beneath their feet. The storm passed as quickly as it had come, leaving the land cleansed and quiet. The air smelled of wet earth, and the sky, once torn with thunder, opened to reveal a sea of stars brighter than he had ever seen. The farmer and the woman sat together on the porch, their clothes still damp, their hearts still racing from what they had faced. He leaned back against the wooden beam, exhaustion tugging at his body, but peace settling over his spirit. She sat close beside him, her braid resting against her shoulder, her gaze fixed on the heavens. For a long time, neither spoke. The silence was not empty now, it was full, rich, alive with all they had endured together. At last, she broke it. Do you remember, she asked softly, the stars we used to watch as children? The ones I told you meant return. His eyes lifted to the sky. He searched, and there it was, the same cluster she had once pointed out, so many years ago, when they had lain in the grass by the river. He nodded slowly. I remember. You said they would always bring us home. She smiled faintly, her voice almost a whisper. And they did. The farmer reached into his pocket and pulled out the bead he had kept hidden all these years. The tiny piece of blue shone faintly in the starlight. He held it out to her, his hand trembling. I thought I had forgotten. But I carried this with me all my life. I guess some promises don't die, even when memory tries to bury them. Her eyes glistened as she took the bead into her hand. Then, with her other hand, she pressed the wooden feather into his palm. And I carried this. Together, they make us whole again. His throat tightened. Words came slowly, heavy with the weight of years. I lost so much in this life. A wife, children I never had, years I can't get back. But finding you again, it feels like the earth itself has given me another chance. She turned to him, her eyes reflecting the starlight. Love doesn't measure time. It only waits. And it waited for us. For a moment, the world around them seemed to vanish. There was no town, no whispers, no threat beyond the horizon. There was only the man who had once been a boy, and the woman who had once been a girl by the river, reunited at last beneath the sky that had always watched over them. He reached out, cupping her face gently, as though afraid she might vanish if he held too tightly. I see you now. I see the girl I loved, the woman you've become, and the strength that carried you here. I will never turn away again. Her lips trembled into a smile, and she leaned into his touch. And I will never leave again. Not while these stars shine above us. The farmer drew her into his arms then, holding her as though the years of separation were finally closing, sealed by the promise they had kept alive in their hearts. Above them, the constellation of return glowed bright, a reminder that some paths, no matter how long or broken, always lead back to where they belong. The land was quiet, the night vast, and in that stillness, the farmer understood a truth he had waited a lifetime to learn. Sometimes destiny does not come when we are young, or when we expect it. Sometimes it waits until the heart has been tempered by loss, until the soul is ready to receive it. And when it comes, it is not just love reborn, it is love fulfilled. The stars burned brighter, as though bearing witness, and the farmer whispered into the night, to her, to the land, to the memory of the boy he once was. Sometimes destiny waits a lifetime, only to return when hearts are ready. Thank you for staying with me until the end of this story. If it touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so we can keep sharing more journeys together.